Tanse, and welcome everyone to George Littlechild. His First Nation name is Nanikawasis, and I'm not sure, what does that mean?
So there's a wonderful little story. So
Sorry.
no, it's a story, right?
Okay.
So in 2001, I had the great privilege of going back to the Ermineskin First Nation where my family is from. And my relatives said they wanted to honor me at the powwow. And some of the people in the room were there. Some of my good friends that are right here, I see that. But anyway, I was told I was going to be honored. And I had no idea that on that day, I would be given my great-grandfather's traditional First Nations name. And so it was a great surprise. And the orator said in Cree and then in English, "Today you will be known as Nanikawasis." And so from that day forward, I carry my great-grandfather's name. So my great-grandfather was a gifted hunter. They say that my great-grandfather could run so fast that he could grab the rabbits by their ears, right? They say my great-grandfather, Nanikawasis, could run so fast he could club the deer. They say that my great-grandfather, Nanikawasis, every time he went hunting, would burn holes in his moccasins because he ran so fast. And who would have to fix his moccasins or make new ones? His wife, my great-grandmother, every time he went hunting. So who do you think he would feed when he brought the deer or whatever he hunted? Who would he feed first? Anyone? Pardon me? Why would he feed the deer? Yeah, no, people. What people in his community would he feed first? No. Orphans and children. Who next? Elders. Who next? The community. Who would he feed last? Himself. Okay. So he was a very revered hunter, and he was a very kind and giving man. So I'm very honored to carry his name, and that's how I got his name.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Now we know.
Yes. Oh, and it actually means swift child because he ran so fast. It shouldn't be little child, and that's the Indian agents that messed our name up.
Okay, there you go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good to know.
Yes.
Okay, so just before we move on, and I'll let you take the floor right away here, but we just need to thank our sponsors, Epcor Heart and Soul Fund and the Canada Council for the Arts. So hi, and
Yes,
I'm going to just pass it over to you, George, and let you have the floor.
Well, I'm not sure if you knew that MJ is the curator of this show, and she's also Cree.
I am, yes, I'm Cree, Mohawk, and French.
There you go.
Yes.
Fancy mix.
Yes.
Well, Tanse, how are you? I'm greeting you in my Cree language.
I'm okay for now.
So it is with a great honor
there's one there.
that this exhibition is being shown, and this is the inaugural exhibition of this body of work. So this is the first time the public will see this work. This is the first time I have seen this work displayed together. So I am an artist who's been an artist for many, many years. My career as a full-time artist began at the age of 30, and I've been creating art full-time since that time. I was born here in Edmonton, August 16, 1958, and I was born at the University of Alberta Hospital, and I always say that's why I have two smarts. And my life here in the city, so the residential school was developed by the Canadian government, and with certain religious groups, the Roman Catholic, the Anglican, and the United, and those were the primary suspects of the residential school. So the next experiment that government of Canada did after the residential schools was something called the 60s Scoop. And why it was called that is it began in the 60s, where the government of Canada started taking First Nations children away from their families. And their parents were residential school survivors. So I am a product, and I don't like to refer to myself as a 60 scoop survivor, but this is the term being used today. And I always say I'm a 60 scoop thriver, but I did survive the 60 scoop. So I was raised in 5 different foster homes. The 4th home, the woman almost killed me. And she was very abusive and threw me down flights of stairs and was very cruel. But thank God for a doctor, a physician who saw what she had done to me. She had told him that I had urinated the bed, and it was an Edmonton cold night, and she said she left the window open, and I had turned black and blue. And the doctor said, there's no way, this is a lie. And he took me out of that foster home, thank God. And I went back to the Children's Care Center, and a Dutch-Canadian couple, so I said to my mom, well, why did you choose me? Like, why me of all those children in the center? And bless her soul, she was very religious, very Christian. And her comment was that we chose you because we wanted to help someone less fortunate. Not the answer I wanted, because they were Christian. They wanted to help people. And so I went to their home, and she was a very loving, understanding, intuitive woman. And she said when I arrived at their home, I was already drawing at the age of 4. So somehow I had developed that skill, which was quite amazing. But I believe the Creator gave me the gift of my art to get me through the hell that I was going through as a child. My mother, with her loving intentions and her Christianity, I mean, that's how, she was a wonderful individual. And so she sent me to art classes as a young boy. It was interesting. And one of the places that I came to was the Edmonton Art Gallery. I came to the institution. The classes were downstairs under this. So part of this art gallery is the original art gallery, which is quite cool. And I remember going to the classes. And I remember at the end of the class, I don't know how long it ran for, maybe a month. I went maybe once a week. At the end of the class, they kept one of my drawings because they thought it showed promise. So that's my bit of history with the Edmonton Art Gallery, which is now the Alberta Art Gallery. So my work that I have created over the course of my career, I have always felt it was my duty. I was chosen, I believe, by the Creator, not God, the Creator, because I don't believe in Christianity. I believe in the First Nations ways. I was chosen by the Creator to do the work I do. And what I believed, and my work is very intuitive, but what I believed is that as a First Nations individual, it was my duty and my responsibility to speak for those who could not speak for themselves. So I always did art about the underdog. I did art about my First Nations history and culture. And so thus began the journey. So I've actually been creating artwork about the residential school for over the last 30 years. And in doing so, I did a lot of research. I spent many days at the archives here on Roper Road, where there were hundreds and hundreds of photographs of First Nations children who attended the residential school. And what I would do, because I had lost my connection to my family, so there's a bit of information that I won't go too deeply into, but it took me 11 years to find my family. I didn't know that I was half Caucasian, I'm half white. And so I found one half sister, one half brother, a full brother, and 2 full sisters. And then I found my aunts and uncles, and aunts and uncles on both sides. And I began to learn about my history, to discover who I am. And in doing so, that information led me to create a lot of the work that I do today. And so what I would do is I would go to archives and I would search through the photographs. And what I would do is I would pay to order 8x10 photographs of these rows and rows of children. And there were no names on the photographs. They were nameless, beautiful little children with no names, no identification. So what I did is this is one of the photographs. So I took the photographs back to Musqueam, or what was then called Hobbema, to the Ermineskin Reserve. And I asked different relatives or different elders. So I asked these individuals, well, who are these people? So they'd say, oh, that's Mary Gooden, that's Mary Soto. Just so you know, this is my late mother, Rachel Littlechild. That's my mom. And this is Dolly Omuso. So they would give me the names. I would write the names on the back of the photographs. And if it was a girl, they'd often say her maiden name and her married name. And if it was a child that came from another reserve to attend the residential school in Musqueam, they would say, well, this girl, her name was so-and-so, but she came from that reserve. So they all seem to know. And then so out of 10 elders, if 8 of them said that was Mary and 2 said it was Susan, that's how I did the research. So it was my intention to bring or copy the names to give to the archives here in Edmonton, the children's names, these beautiful unidentified children. And so just losing my train of thought there for a second. So what happened was that in these photographs, there were always certain children no one knew. Well, why didn't they know? They seemed very clear. They would identify about 88% of the photograph. They knew all the kids' names, but there were always these children no one knew. And I took it upon myself, and I thought about, so often as an artist, not every artist is the same, but often ideas live in my mind. And I thought about these children, and I really felt it was my responsibility to tell their story. And this was long before finding the graves and Kamloops, just so you know. And so I started drawing each one of those children. No one knew who they were. What happened to them? Did they die at the school? What happened to them? Why does no one know who they are? So that's what this exhibition is all about, right? Here I am. Can you see me? These children are unidentified. No one is connected to them, it seems or appears. So I wanted to give each and every one of those children in those photographs a voice. But what I also did, this is right here, you see the young boy with the barbed wire. So my uncle Willie Littlechild, and I didn't know this because I had never heard this before, but he said that there was electric barbed wire around the school. So if you tried to escape, you would get electrified. What does that sound like in your minds? Does that sound like the Holocaust? Exactly. So this, I didn't even know. I had 2 uncles. So my grandmother, Bella, also went to residential school. And my grandfather, Edward, also went to residential school. My grandfather, Edward, died at 53, and my grandmother was 36 after 12 children. 9 of her children went to the residential school out of 12. And so I had no idea until my auntie, my late auntie Rosalie, She said, I had an uncle. He was an artist. I said, who, Auntie? His name was Louis. And he died at the residential school. And so this is Louis. We don't know how he died. We have no idea where he's buried, right? He's around the property. And then I discovered in my research that I had another uncle, Alfred, another brother to my mother, late mother, and he also died. So when you arrived at the residential school, you're often 5 or 6 or 7, sometimes children were 3 and 4, and they arrived at the residential school. And when you were 16, it was called timed out. So that represented the fact that you were now able to leave the school. I guess in a weird sense, it was like a graduation. And so Alfred did not live, he either died there or right after. So there was 2 of my mother's brothers that died at the Ermineskin Indian Residential School. So now let's fast forward to finding the graves of 215 children at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. And in realizing the work that was created for this exhibition is talking about all those issues, right? Is speaking for those children who didn't go home, they didn't return. They were nameless, no name. And can you imagine, anyone in this room, how many of you have children? Hands up. Okay, can you imagine someone coming to your home and taking your children away? And you never saw them, perhaps ever again? Because that's what happened. Losing the child's connection to their language, identity, losing the possibility of being loved. So what was taught at the residential school? No one hugged you. No one said, geez, Bob, you're an amazing boy. You're a good boy. They never heard that. So I have lost 5 relatives in Maskwacis to COVID. My beautiful last uncle in my family, Uncle Rainey, and his wife, Auntie Rachel, my cousin Ellen, and 2 second cousins died of COVID. And he was my last connection, so there's no more aunts and uncles left. And in thinking about what happened to them, they really never, so people, the elders, never told me what happened to them at the schools. Late Auntie Rachel, I don't know why, she just started talking a little bit. So when we arrived at the school, they gave us a great big thick white roll of ribbon, and they gave us a grease pencil. So this is my friend John. So if John, when he arrived at the residential school, he's no longer John. He's number 74. And what John would have to do is cut a piece of that ribbon with the grease pencil, so he would have to sew it in his shirt, sew it in his pants, his socks, his undergarments, his hat, his coat, his shoes. And for the rest of his time at the residential school, he's number 74. So if John lost his hat and another boy who was number 43 came and found 74's hat, he knew right away. He didn't go up to John and say, John, I found your hat. Hey, 74, I have your hat. So that's what happened. What does that sound like? A prison. Suddenly you were stripped of anything you had, and that's what Orange Shirt Day is all about. When Phyllis arrived at the school, her beautiful orange shirt her mother had given her was taken away on Great Orange Shirt Day. So my aunt goes on to tell another story. She said that she was responsible for ironing the nuns, this part, the habit, this is called a habit, she would iron that. And it had to be starched, and it was stiff and hard. And one day, I don't know how, but because they never saw the nun without this. They always had this on. And so one day, she came into the room because she was ironing, and there was a nun, and her head was shaved bald, and she screamed. They didn't know them as people. They weren't people, they were like a human, really. And she didn't have her habit on. So that's another story. My aunt and uncle say when they woke up very early in the morning, they would have to pray for a couple hours on their knees. Then they would be given the same breakfast every morning, terrible porridge every day, same meals. Meanwhile, they were fed, and then they were given, so they called it a school, but it wasn't really a school. It was more a labor camp, because all the girls had to sew, iron, clean. The boys had to do yard work, do the garden, do everything outside the residential school. So they remember praying, eating, have a bit of education, and all afternoon you were doing your chores. And I've heard this story from many different angles and viewpoints of the fact that while the children were given the worst food, and there were residential schools across Canada that literally were starving the children intentionally, the children were hungry every day. They were hungry all the time. They went to bed hungry. They would cry at night. There was no nun, no priest that came and loved them and said, I love you, and cherished them and hold them. They never got held. The only time they were held or were touched was to get beaten or slapped or raped. That was the only touch that they ever experienced. And I'll get into that in a bit further. So knowing just those few little stories that happened with my aunt and uncle, my late aunt and uncle. So those are a couple stories. But I haven't heard about the abuse in my personal family. But my beautiful mother, Rachel, late Rachel, after residential school. So at one point, did you know that people who lived on a First Nations reserve had to get permission to leave? So they had to ask the Indian agent for permission to leave. So you would approach the Indian agent, and let's say you had to go to the hospital in the next town, the white town. So you would say to the Indian agent, so he'd say, George Littlechild will go to Wetaskiwin, and he's allowed to leave, and he has to be home back to the reserve by 6:30. And it was a pass, it was an actually written thing. And if you didn't come back on time, the RCMP were sent to get you and put in prison. So by the time my mother became a young lady, that had changed. So she was free to leave the reserve. And what happened, if you've never been loved, you've never been held, can you imagine? They say that babies who are in orphanages that nobody touched, they never get touched, right? And they grow up, they've never been touched as small children. And the importance of being touched and loved and nurtured and given the great gift of love. Well, these children didn't get that. They got it when they were very small from their parents. But once they went to the residential school, that was gone. Everything they were and what they were was gone. So when the residential school survivor left at age 16, right? They didn't know what love was. And so traditionally, what would have happened within my mother's people, there were planned marriages. You would look at your child and you would make an arrangement with this family, and you would say, one day this girl and that boy will be married. And there was celebration and sacred ceremonies. Well, now the priest would decide who would marry who. And so the partner that you were given, right, to be married to was also a residential school survivor. So this one was never loved, right? Except as a very small child and would have forgotten that. This one didn't know love, so they got together. Well, how could they love each other? They don't know what love is. So they had children. When they had the children, they didn't love them. Why? Because that's what they were taught in residential school. So you have generations. So you talk to someone who would have survived the Holocaust. Well, the second generation is messed up because of what happened to their parents in the Holocaust. It's no different with First Nations residential schools. The children of those people are messed up. So it goes generationally until people say, enough. This has to stop. We have to start and teaching and healing and healing and healing and healing. So when I look at my poor little mother, she actually died 3 blocks from here on Skid Row in 1965. She drank herself to death. She was a residential school survivor. She was 37 when she died. I don't know what happened to her. No one's ever told me. I have no history of whatever happened to my mother to make her become such an alcoholic. But this is part of it, is that the government took her 5 children away in the 60s scoop. Well, anyone in this room, if your children were taken away from you, it will kill your soul in a great way. And you will never, ever forget what happened. So my poor mother, Rachel, I don't have no memory of her because of the crazy foster mother beating me up at the age of 4. So 30 minutes have passed and the talk is done, I guess. But I'm just going to do one more thing. Do we really have to follow time?
You have 10 more minutes.
Okay, 10 more minutes. And how long's the Q&A? Okay, I might eat into your time. Anyway. Okay, everybody to stand up and follow me. Yeah. So I'm just going to show you a few things in the drawings that you might not have noticed. So when you see the red, so I've often had this gift of seeing what is called an aura, and I don't see it on everyone. Not everybody's aura shows up, but often, like the other night, my cousin, it was all purple here on one side. So these are the spirits, like it's a spirit, and so all the children, and the priest also has the red around him. And what it means is that they were in these institutions, and why? Because of Christianity. And who died for their sins but Christ? And what is the symbols? One of the symbols of Christ dying is the blood of Jesus. So you see the red all around the children. You see the 3 crosses, Jesus and the 2 other individuals that died at Gethsemane or Golgotha. You'll see the symbol of the window, and the door is often in the drawings, and that represents looking out of the window, but never being able to get out of the window unless you were given permission. I mean, the doors and windows, given permission to do so. So in essence, they were in prison. And so it was really symbolic, because I've heard of different stories where a survivor talked about looking out the window and seeing her grandparents in the distance and not being able to talk to them and not being able to run and to run after her grandparents, but she herself was imprisoned behind this glass and behind this door. So you see doors. And so some of the children are from the era of about 1920 and 30. So here's a young lady's first communion, right? She was making a commitment to who? Jesus Christ. She had a marriage now with Jesus Christ. So now she was confirmed a Catholic, a Christian Catholic. So she has now married into the faith. And every child went for communion. Here's from the photographs. I don't know his name, but here's the numbering system. And when you see that in the drawings, it represents the number of souls that the priests and nuns would have converted, right? Converted from their savage pagan ways to become a Christian. So it's a numbering system. How many souls did they save in the name of Jesus Christ? And often I'd like you to look at the title, read the titles, because they're very important as well. Another child, you see the crosses. So each drawing has a different interpretation of the symbol of the cross. So if you look in the background, does anyone know what that might be? Anyone? No? No, it's actually porridge. The oats, right? So in reminiscent, so things like that wouldn't have been part of it because of Christianity in the residential school. So part of the grant, so I received a beautiful grant from the BC Arts Council to create this work. So I grew up in Edmonton and I left when I was 18. I haven't lived in Alberta since I was 30 and I am now 63. So anyway, I came back to Ermineskin, to the graveyard, and I did a few drawings of these graves that had no names on them, just the mound was there. I don't know if the children are there or not, but I did a couple drawings and sat there and reminisced, talked about, so everything in the First Nations reality is based on a circle, the continuation. And I always say that the circle has been broken. It's been tampered with. Our culture has been tampered with. So when I have a beautiful story about my great-grandparents that I was given. And he was a First Nations chief leader. And what happened is that he would gather all his grandsons and they would all be in a circle, right? And he would give them, teach them how to be a boy and when you become a man. So all the teachings they needed in order to be a beautiful, productive human being within the community. So my great-grandmother did the same thing with the girls. So when the settler nation arrived and this whole idea that you are in power and all these rows, like the whole thing about the school system, it's all these rows and rows of children. You look at the back of someone's head and you see the teacher. So in these traditional teachings, nobody was above anyone else. And when the settler nation brought education, right, it was like the teacher had all the power in the room, the children didn't. So that all changed, just an example. Once again, you see the doors, the windows, the child. So I just have to say that when creating this body of work, there were days that I couldn't do it. You know, so every day except I treat my career, so Monday to Friday I work. And when I was younger, I'd stay in the studio for hours and I have a time limit. It's 3 hours a day because I don't want to abuse my creativity. It's not an endless thing. You have to respect it. So I honor it. And so some days I couldn't do this work. So I would do other paintings. It was funny, last night someone says, why don't they have an exhibition of your colorful work? And I said, that's not what this is about. So if you know my art, you know all the color, right? And this is really quite devoid of color, except the red. And we talked about the symbolism of that. So here again is another young girl, First Communion. So when drawing these from the photographs, what started happening, what I started communicating in a very deep, meaningful way. Often I would have to smudge, I would go for a walk, sometimes I would cry with the subject matter that I was dealing with. So it's so here, what's behind this young man's head? Anyone want to guess? Does everybody see it? Have a closer look if you can. What might that be? Be very careful, don't fall. Anyone know what that is? Lice eggs, thank you. What's this? Yes. So when the children arrived, their heads were shaved. They were thrown this horrible white powder all over their head and body. And they didn't wash it off, right? They just threw at these kids to kill the lice. What does that sound like? The Holocaust, the same deal. So why do First Nations people in Alberta especially wear braids? Anyone? Braids. Anyone can answer that? So we believe when you have long, beautiful hair, and it was when you were born, traditionally, your hair would not be cut unless somebody died. And if it was someone close, your braids were cut off. If it was a distant relative, a handful of hair was cut off. But what hair is power. It's an extension of all our energy. So the braids were to keep the hair nice and clean and neat. It was also the strength and the power of the individuals. So referring back to those children, they don't have braids anymore. So all their beautiful, beautiful black braids were cut, and their power, in essence, was stripped from them, their identity and culture. So this is actually the nun from that photograph. And I wish, so now all the people that I had asked who the individuals were in these photographs have all passed away. So all those elders I worked with are gone now. So I'll probably never know her name, and you're going to tell me that I have to stop, right?
No.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So here's the numbering system once again, right? And so here's the cross of Jesus, and it's turned like this, right? So it represents a symbol of what happened in the name of this, I believe, was totally wrong. And I think since the discovery of the children's graves in Kamloops, so Truth and Reconciliation has been around a while, but it's only once the graves were discovered that I think as people of Canada and also the United States, that there's been this huge awakening in this country. Even the cab driver, we were talking about it on the way here. And, you know, working with this work, every time the news has been on for the last few months, I cry, but I don't stop watching it. Because if I stop watching, I stop listening and I hide and try and deny what's going on or stop my feelings. So as an artist, this work is very cathartic, not just for myself, but for you and for all people. So I'm going to read the title. So it says, "Did she turn the other way while the priest abused the children? And did she too abuse the innocent?" And I just want to say something to you. This information is disturbing. And when you go home today, I want you to take care of yourselves, right? Do something nice for yourself, because it's heavy, heavy stuff. And what I'm going to say next is extremely heavy. How did these children die? What happened to these children? This is a tough one. So the priests would abuse girls and boys, but the boy didn't get pregnant, but the girl could. It was always hidden, and what they would do, and I know this is terrible, and it sounds like the Holocaust. When the baby was born, they threw it in the incinerator and burned it. When the nun abused a boy, a young boy, right? So these boys left when they were 16. They were capable of having sexual relations. She would rape them. She might, they had a child. Where did it go? The incinerator. Or in unmarked graves. So this is children and people. I mean, people knew about these unmarked graves for years and years. Children who went to these residential schools knew about them, but nobody was listening. Nobody did anything until they found this amazing ground penetrating tool that discovered the graves. And now, as we know, more schools have been searched and they're finding more and more bodies. And so there's thousands of bodies still to be found. So this man, his name was Father Pierre Moulet. So the order that was in Musqueam on the Ermineskin Reserve was the Oblate. They were French Canadian. So they spoke French, learned how to speak English, taught the children how to speak English in their French accent. So when you go to visit relatives, is that you, Edie? Oh, you look like a cousin of mine from my Dutch side. Sorry. So anyway, when you, my aunt and uncle, could you close the light? Could you open the light? It's not like turn the light on and off. So every time that they would refer to this young lady, they would call you him and he. And I would be referred to as a she and a her, because in French, right? And so they had, it was, my auntie would say that, well, go tell him. And I'm like, well, no, that's a her. So it was humorous. And you have to, so the greatest gift as First Nations people is laughter is the best medicine. If you have a First Nations friend, or no First Nations, or Inuit, or Métis people, you're going to find they laugh a lot, because we've been through hell and back, and laughter is the best cure for any human. It's the best medicine to have. And so I find when I'm with my First Nations family, we laugh a lot, even though we had this in our history. So here's Father Moulet. So I have photographs of him when he was younger, when he arrived. He was very thin. And I have this photograph of my great-grandparents, the Littlechilds, and they're very old, and here's the buckboard, they're standing here, and he's standing on the side, and his stomach was out to here. And I thought, yeah, the priests and nuns were having banquets while the kids were starving. And so behind him, these are bones of the dead children. So before Truth and Reconciliation started, and you know what, I'm going to eat up your question period, I'm sorry. Because I know that everything's timed here. What happened was that when I was doing my research and gathering all these photographs, is I discovered the admission and discharge book. So I ordered a copy of the book. And this is before Truth and Reconciliation. What happened with Truth and Reconciliation is that once these archives, with all these religious orders, archival material, is they started shutting down all the records. The records were closed down. So no longer could you look at them. Why? Because they were scared of being sued, right? So I have a copy of the discharge and the arrival. So when you arrived, it said your name, how old you were, your mother and father's name, which reserve you came from. When you left the school, you were discharged, it also had your name and what grade you achieved and why you left the school. So I didn't include anyone's names because I didn't want to offend someone who might see this show and see their ancestors' name. So I didn't include names. Ermineskin Roman Catholic boarding school, remarks on discharge, reason for same. What does that mean? I don't know. So basically, this is not my handwriting. This is the handwriting from the record. So the grade 5, needed at home. And so it just says ditto, ditto. This person only had grade 1. They were sickly. This person had grade 8, time over. So that meant they were 16. And then you start seeing stuff like this: dead, sick, time over, sickly, time over, needed at home, time over, time over. So then each page, right? So I only created 3 pages from the record. So it says time over, someone was of the age of marriage, dead, poor eyesight, needed at home, dead. So I started seeing the word dead a lot. And so here I've blown up one of those pages, and then I've added the teardrops. Sickly, time over, dead, sick, time over, sickly, dead, needed at home, time over, dead, time over. So they were not easy doing all of this work. Yeah, sure, I have a therapist because I had to talk to someone about these things that I was experiencing while drawing this body of work. So once again, my late, so as I said, my aunt said he was an artist and he was a good-looking kid and he died at 11. So here you see, so these are older drawings that were done before. And so you see the nun, so it says, and so all my work is very important, the title, it says Sister Nun, the Problem. You see the child, the tears coming out of her eyes. So all of this, the direction of the nun, and then my Uncle Alfred. And so then I just write a little bit about that information. So at this time, and I just wanted to acknowledge the Alberta Art Gallery and the staff and the curator, MJ, and all the staff that I've dealt with over this time. I want to thank the Alberta Art Gallery for showing this important work. And this is the inaugural exhibition of this art. The intention with time is to have this travel. And that's something I have something to look forward to, that I want as many Canadians and as many people as possible to see this work, because I feel that this work is very important. I also would like to ask you to tell others about this show. Tell others about what you learned today. Let them know that this show is up for 3 months, right? That they can come by and look at the show. And once you do, bringing friends and family, have a dialogue about it. And you could share some of these symbols. And I know there will be tours given, and the docents have all the information that I talked about in certain drawings. So I just want to acknowledge the gallery again and say, hi, and a now, and I'm very honored and privileged to have in my hometown of Edmonton, Alberta.
Well, thank you again, George, for being here and for your talk. We really enjoyed that. I did, for sure. I know there's a few people that really have some dying questions. So maybe, I know our time is pretty limited, but if we can just maybe be brief with our questions and just have a couple, if there's some that really want to ask a few things. So go ahead if you're really anxious to ask. Sure, you can come closer if you'd like.
This is a tough one. Every time, I'm a professor at the University of Alberta. I'm a professor at the University of Alberta in Native Studies and Art Design. I teach this, and I have my students make work on this, which is so hard. I can't even stay in the room, and I want.
Yeah.
And so again, I don't even know, my legs just take off.
Right.
But as First Nations people who have generations of people who went to residency schools, do we negotiate that space? How do you negotiate that space where people who are, intergenerational,
Right.
former students, feel about them coming into the place and really being upset because of academics?
Right,
Yeah.
and it's true. So, to honor, I think that's the beginning, to honor each and every one of those individuals who survived the residential school, to honor their children, to acknowledge, this is part of the truth, is telling the truth. How do you know where you're going unless you know where you came from? So this is acknowledging. And what I believe is, and so I had a residential school, my good friend, her mother came, she's a residential school survivor and elder, and she never talks about this stuff. So they left the show and they're in the parking lot, and she started crying, and she doesn't really talk about it. So what I believe that this work is all about healing, right? And we have to be in the moment, acknowledge, talk about the horrible things. My mother was a prostitute. Who wants to talk about that? But it's the truth. Why did she prostitute? Because of the residential school. She was surviving. Once we acknowledge the truth, live with it, sit with it, instead of running's okay, but running to the bottle, running to the drugs, running to the casino, to dull all our pains, all the empty holes in our bodies, trying to fill them up so we can feel normal, whatever that is. And so I just want to honor you for being an educator and that you do work around this with the students that you deal with. And I don't know if you're allowed to smudge at the university. I'm glad you are, because that always heals. And with the tobacco ties. So I noticed my uncle Willie Littlechild at the opening, he had tobacco ties with him and he was holding them. So I remember one of my aunts, right, from Muscatine, and she gave rock. She said, it's at home, sorry. I thought about it, should have brought it. But when I was I said, hold that rock. So find things to hold on. And it's really about grounding.
Mm.
And how important is breath work, right? Breathing. And then to be in the moment when people have a panic attack is learning how to do breath work. We learning all the skills we need, and especially as First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. So now, just so you know, if your mother or father went to residential school or your grandparents, there is a healing fund from the Truth and Reconciliation. So my therapy gets paid for by the Truth and Reconciliation because of my mother, my aunts and uncles, and my grandparents.
Mm.
So there are those things. And I want anyone in this room to know that if this really bothers you, there is a phone number there on the wall to call, and somebody's there to listen to you. You don't have to give your name, it's all anonymous. So in part, it's just being in the moment, being grounded, honoring, I celebrate that I'm here. As I said, I could have been killed in that foster. I could have. I have a huge scar on my head from this crazy woman.
Mm.
And the weird thing is every time, and I had an elder tell me once, tell your story, there's a bit more healing. So every time you're doing this work, there's more healing, more healing, more healing. But we have to ground ourselves, heal ourselves, love ourselves. Because without love as humanity, as we know, where would we be? Without the trees, we would have no air. It's all hand in hand in hand, right? So did that answer the question? Okay.
Mm.
And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, the man there.
Or it's the symbolism of what you're wearing around here.
Well, you know what? This is actually a horse. There's a little horse in the middle. And so the horse for me, well, I'll just tell you. So I've never had this confirmed, but my friend who's also a Cree artist, Ruth Cuthand, you might have heard of her. Her father, late Adam, he said, you know, your friend, he has the horse spirit. And he said, in the Cree way, we believe that the horse goes to the other world, and this is just for the artist. And a lot of my art is intuitive, is that intuitively there's a channel that is brought to the artist. And so that's why I'm wearing Mistatim, and it means big dog. You know why? Before the horses arrived, there was dogs. So when they would move their camp, the dog would have a travois, which is a French word, and would carry their home, what they owned, on its back. So when the horse arrived, can you imagine? This big animal, so much bigger than the dog, could carry, their teepee got larger, right? And they could carry more things. So it's an amazing thing. When the horse arrived, what a gift to the people. So it's it's a spiritual connection. So it's Mistatim, the horse, and that's why I'm wearing mine. And I don't know, I've never been confirmed, but I have always felt this because as a child growing up here in Edmonton in my foster home, I was drawing horses. I had no idea, right? And so now I understand why. You're welcome. Anyone else? Yep.
Can you tell the story of the food revolt?
The what?
Of the food revolt or food, and then the girls in the residential school broke into the cupboards.
I think you need to tell that story. Because it's not a story, I've heard of it.
Oh, it's not my story.
Yeah, I know, but it's not my story either. So I can't, I mean, I've heard about these things.
Yeah,
Yeah, so there's different situations where, because, and thank you for bringing that up, where children, of course, were starved so badly that children started acting out. And when you started acting out and you stole food, you paid the penalty. So my partner, John, his mother was made to wash the whole staircase and the floors, and she had to wash it with a toothbrush. So she was there all day washing for stealing food, right? So the children that were preparing food for the school, for the priests and nuns, they would steal the potato peelings. And if they got caught, there's huge penalties, huge abuse. And I really don't know that story, so I can't tell it. Did all kinds of things. They became thieves. They stole to survive. And I didn't know that, but there were gangs in the schools. Did you ever hear that? There were. There are actually gangs. And so what the priests and nuns were doing to them, they started doing to each other. right?
Mhm.
Because that's what they were learning. So there was very little food, no love. It was a terrible situation. So I believe, yes?
Apparently at this school, they shut down the school because of it.
Okay, well,
They all got killed.
oh, I never heard that one, but okay, thank you. Right, it's good that you know that, right? The more information we know, the more that we can share with others, definitely. More power, yes. Okay, so I want to say thank you.
Yeah.
and Thank you.
Okay.
So why did you go at the storytelling literal?
Because that's what the Creator brought me in the world to do.
Is there more than a story?
Well, I have a few books out. I am a bit of an author, so. But that's never been my course of action. I'm dyslexic, number one. So for me, writing has never come easy. But this has always been, and I don't like to say it comes easy, but it's always there for me too. And I always say art is my best friend. It has never let me down. It has always loved and nurtured me, brought me to places around the world I would have never gone. I'm able to talk to you today. So that's the gift. And I thank the Creator every day for the gift I was given.
Mhm.
So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much again,
You're
George.
welcome.
So thank you everyone for coming. Please stay and enjoy the exhibit. For those that are listening online, please come to the gallery and see it live or in person. We always welcome everyone to come and see this exhibit. It's a very important one, and I think we all need to be aware of the time that we're living in with the situation that it is with these children. So thank you again, and thank you for being here. So much
welcome.
appreciated,
Thank
and
you.
have a great day, everyone.